And they're going to regard you as, well, just a bloody mess. And how can anyone possibly live with someone like you? And so another reason why it's useful to understand your personality is because I think it gives you a better crack at finding someone that you can actually live with over the long run. And we don't know what the optimal, I don't think you want to live with someone who's exactly like you, because then both of you have the same strengths and weaknesses. And there's a bit of a problem there, right? Because maybe an agreeable person can use a bit of a disagreeable person around them to balance each other out, and vice versa, right? So we don't understand the optimal balance for long-term thriving in a relationship, but I think we do understand the fact that if you're too different in your traits, that where you're different is going to constitute a chronic source of conflict. So anyway, so you can think about that. So, all right, so how have psychologists studied personality? Well, I'm going to talk most about the statistical psychometric approach to begin with, but there are other approaches that we will talk about as well. So let me give you the background on the self-report methodology first, because it's really formed the backbone of psychological research into personality. So imagine that you took a comprehensive sample of all the descriptive adjectives in the English language. Now, it's trickier than you think, because actually what constitutes an adjective isn't that easy to determine, because many words have forms that are adjective, verb, and noun, depending on how the same word is written out. So distinguishing adjectives from verbs or adverbs turns out to be more difficult than you might think. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you could collect all of the descriptive adjectives in the English language, and that then perhaps you decided, because you don't want to use all of them, you decided that you were going to use the most common 1,000 of them. And there are tables that enable you to look up the frequency of words. And it turns out that in common parlance, it's like 5% of the vocabulary of English language accounts for 95% of the usage. It's an example of this phenomena called the Pareto distribution, which we will talk about later. So, in fact, most discourse is done with 500 words. You can get about 80%, something like that, of speech in terms of single word comprehension with 500 words. So let's say you took you took all the descriptive adjectives, and then you took the ones that were the most common 1,000. And so here's the hypothesis part. And this is a critical thing to know. This is called the linguistic hypothesis. And the linguistic hypothesis is that variation in personality among human beings is of sufficient import so that it's become accurately coded in the lexicon. So what that means is that, roughly speaking, is that over the course of the evolution of any language, we'll use English as the example here, descriptive terms have been generated that actually do cover the variation in personality, and that essentially cover them without bias. Now, that's a hypothesis. Actually, it's an axiom. It's because the hypothesis is, in some sense, it's not exactly testable. We'll leave that aside for now. It's testable a little bit, but not easily. So that's the first thing you have to accept. You have to accept that it's possible to extract out what constitutes personality by looking at the linguistic representation of descriptors insofar as they're encapsulated in language. Okay, so when people talk about trait models like the Big Five being comprehensive representations of personality, that isn't exactly what they mean. And you need to know this. What they mean is that it's a comprehensive representation of personality insofar as personality has been encapsulated in language. There may be elements of personality that we haven't been able to talk about, or we don't know how to talk about,